Hey, welcome. This summer, we are doing something very exciting. We are doing an entire study and series on the Old Testament. And so we're inviting you to go on vacation with us and the Old Testament. We're going to start here in Genesis today. And so thank you for being part of that. One of the first things you may notice when you start reading the book of Genesis is that there's almost two creation stories. There's Genesis 1 chapter and there's Genesis 2 chapter. Why are there difference? In fact, I've heard some people say, look, at the very beginning, I can't trust the Bible because there's two entirely different creation accounts. Well, I would say that's really not good biblical reading or exegesis. Let me give you an idea as to why there are two biblical accounts of the creation story, why they're important that they're separate, and how we begin to study the book of Genesis. And I'm going to do it all in about 2 minutes. You ready? So Genesis 1 is the creation story really from God's perspective. Genesis 1 is reminding us that God is outside of time, space, and matter because he's able to create all those things. Before God created, time, space, and matter did not exist because God is pure essence, and he is abiding outside of those things. So we see in Genesis 1 that God is outside of that. Now, we're going to get into this in our next video, but the entire Genesis 1 account, remember, was given to Moses to tell the people as they left Israel. They were saying, hey, did the Canaanite gods, Gilgamesh and all those other stories, is this how this came to be about? Was there really this God that was cut in two and that's how the earth and the sky was created? Or was there another way it happened? And so Moses is setting straight how the creation happened. It happened by one single deity who was not aided by anybody, who spoke all things into being. And everything exists because of that one being, the one being who created all things. In Genesis 2, you'll notice doesn't really conflict with the Genesis 1 story. It just has a little different ordering of things. And the reason why is because Genesis 2 is focused on the humanity side. What is the role of humans in the garden story? And ultimately, Genesis 2 and Genesis 3 is a unified story of how did we get to where we are? If God in Genesis 1 leaves us with, and everything was good, and when he created humanity, it was very good, how did we get to the mess we're in? Because clearly we're not still in the garden. Clearly things aren't as they ought to be. And anytime there's an ought, we know there is a way things were meant to be, which requires a divine creator outside of all that we know exists right now. So we end up with Genesis 2 with God giving Adam and Eve the instructions to care for the garden, to live harmoniously with the land, with each other, and with all creation. But it's not going to stay that way. So Genesis 2 is not a story that conflicts with Genesis 1. It's a story saying Genesis 1 is here's how things got created. God did it. It's not meant to be a scientific textbook. God created. Genesis 2 is, and what was the role of humanity? And so it's an entirely different perspective from the same theological standpoint that God created with intent and purpose. There is an ought for all humanity. Hey, thanks for joining us this summer. I'm so excited that you get to be a part of our summer vacation in the Old Testament. We're going to go really in depth in understanding who God is and what God reveals about his faithfulness in this time together. Blessings, guys.